Hello, Ingo. Can you hear me, Ingo?
Yes.
Yep. Perfect.
How was your week?
Quite good. Unfortunately, the weather is turning around the wrong way. It's a bit rainy here in Cologne, but everything else looking good.
Same here.
Someone's asking already in the chat, which I really like. You can use the chat function to ask us questions. Someone's asking if they can mention this webinar on social media, and of course we advertise it on social media. We post it on social media, so feel free to share it as well. We're actually super happy if you do. Today we have a pretty interesting topic. It's about behavioral pricing. It's basically, and Ingo, you will explain this much better than I can, about the role of psychological or behavioral effects when it comes to pricing and revenue management, and how they can be quite tricky to actually implement in the day-to-day beyond what we know from anecdotes. And we actually want to take a closer look at some examples, how they work in practice and how they might be limited in practice, and then also speak about how they can be used or dealt with in practice. And yeah, that's going to be the webinar for today. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them, as the first person already did in the chat. You can address the chat to everyone if you want to share the question, or you can also ask in the Q&A, and we will read those questions out at the end, and we'll have leave a little bit of time for that. Ingo, if you want to go to the next page, I just want to do a quick company intro. So today, Dr. Ingo Reinhardt will be leading this webinar. He's the co-founder at Bonomics. He has over 12 years experience in pricing and revenue management, and also developed the Bonomics method. And I'm Paul. I'm head of sales of Bonomics. So if you want to work with us or want to find out more, I'm the person to get in touch with. And yeah, I will be moderating this talk today. And I will also be answering questions or addressing them in chat. Quick note about Bonomics, what it is. We are a software empowering you to make better pricing and revenue management decisions. Our four key USPs are really the holistic approach that we have. We'll see some of that today, the predictive accuracy, the speed with which we can get insights, and lastly, the profitability that results from it. And with that, I hand over to
Not yet.
Yeah, exactly. We have our headquarters in Germany, but really operational worldwide. So ready for any challenge that you throw to us. So now I hand over to you, Ingo.
Perfect. Thanks, Paul. So also welcome from my side, and we're very happy to talk about this topic today. And I think we have something unique to offer on the topic, and I hope this becomes clear in the coming minutes. So I think what we'll do is talk a bit about the foundations of behavioral economics, behavioral pricing, some of the motivations, and then we'll quickly go into the topic and I think what into its application. And I think this is the relevant part. The beginning. I think there are many webinars on this, so you can find the contents on that the infos on that anywhere. But I think the second part that goes into the application, making it useful, that's something where we have something to offer, and that's also what we want to talk about. If as Paul also said, if you have any questions, please just drop them in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll go through them at the end or later on by email. So very much interested in your thoughts and happy to discuss anything that's relevant on the topic. So let's get started with something simple. Probably you've seen something similar a few times, but why is there behavioral pricing? And that's because we're behavioral people, and even if we are aware of that, it's really difficult to not be this way, and in particular it's very hard to be rational. So I think this is an example that highlights what's the challenge in a very straightforward way. So if you look at the two arrows on the right side, and even if I tell you that the lines between the arrows have exactly the same length as they do, it's really, really difficult to see that, right? Because in the way the arrows point gives a very different impression. So, and this is an extreme example. So even so, you know that they have the same length, it's really difficult to actually see that. And the same is true for many things that are closer to pricing. For example, I think the most prominent example is a price threshold. Even if you know that 9.99 and 10 is pretty much the same, it's really, really difficult to act accordingly and treat the two prices the same way, particularly if you're distracted by other things, or for example, if you're in a rush, then 9.99 appears to be much cheaper than 10 euros. And this is essentially what we will talk about today. And also from a pricing or revenue management point of view, how we can deal with these challenges and use them to some extent in our daily work. So just to get started, some basic foundations. I think there are two types of people, I would say. Homo economicus, who is the foundation of everything that's founded in microeconomics. So every time we talk about price elasticities, demand functions, there's always some variation of the Homo economicus underlying this. So every time you use these concepts like a price elasticity, your at least implicit assumption is based on Homo economicus. That means that you assume that people are rational, so they and typically they maximize the utility. So that means they can consider all alternatives and then make consistent decisions. So that means if you show someone an offer at a retailer where they can choose between dozens of products, or if you buy extra RAM for your mobile phone and you look at Amazon and you maybe get 10,000 offers, the assumption is that you can essentially consider all of them, and given your priorities on the size, the price, the brand, and other features of the product, you will make a decision that's completely consistent. So if you add something or remove something, you will have some consistency in your preferences. And if you prefer a certain product in a certain context, you will still be consistent also if that product is put in a different context. And we all know that that's very demanding to do. Very difficult to do, and in reality, we will not be consistent, and our choices will depend on the circumstances and all of these things. So it's really, really difficult to be rational in these purchasing decisions, and that's why there is the field of behavioral economics, and more specifically for us, behavioral pricing, and the starting points is that people are essentially irrational, and the way we operate is that we don't run complicated utility maximizing functions in our head, but rather tend to use simple heuristics to make our decisions. The problem comes into place, and of course, if you're happy to share in the comments, we're happy to discuss afterwards. If you work with behavioral pricing, in many cases that I've seen, they're sort of being combined with other methods. So there is people determine say an optimal price using price elasticities, and then add some behavioral addition to it, where they say, okay, the profit optimal price, let's say, is 17 euros. And then if we consider behavioral economics, we might go to 16.99 or 14.99 or maybe 19.99. So somewhere around the optimum that's derived from a rational assumption is what's then been adjusted using behavioral economics. But you already sense in this example that this might not that this is probably not the best way to deal with it. So often, and this is something we see in many fields, you put things together that come from different traditions, have different implicit or explicit assumptions, and when they're put together, the result often doesn't make sense because you assume at the same time that your customers are rational and that they are irrational. So there are many problems that might come from it. And the question is, what's the better way of dealing with it? And I want to, not in the next slide, but in later slides, show you a solution to that problem. So the field of behavioral economics, and more specifically behavioral pricing, I think it's been discussed a lot, and it's quite attractive because it's always often presented in the way of anecdotes, many stories where something happens that's interesting, and particularly if you come from a strictly rational point of view, has unexpected consequences where people behave strangely, and that can be used or abused by whoever designs a certain context or designs a certain offer. I think prominent examples are something like the substitution effect or the anchoring effect. Let's, as an example, talk about anchoring. The idea is that if people, say in pricing, you have a product where it's really difficult to understand what the proper value of the product is. Let's say you're interested in buying some luxury items, and a store shows you a really expensive handbag, let's say of 5,000 euros. And then you go deeper into the store, and then you see, okay, there are different handbags that cost only 1,000 or 2,000. They appear to be really cheap compared to the initial one you saw, and you might tend to buy then these bags at 1,000 or 2,000 euros, and you feel like you've made a great deal, but in reality, without the initial anchoring in the beginning, the bags are still pretty expensive. So rationally or objectively, you probably haven't made a very good deal, but because of that anchoring effect, and because it's difficult for you to assess what the proper price for a handbag is, maybe you can be influenced with such a price anchor. And this already suggests that this can't be done in every context. In cases where you have a very good understanding of what the pricing structure is, or what the fair price is, this would be very difficult to do. Let's say if you're looking at gas prices, and you have a good understanding of what the current rates are, also they fluctuate a bit, it would be very difficult for a gas station to anchor you to accept a double price, right? So they can do it to some extent, but it would be very difficult to use a price anchor in a context where people already have a very good understanding of what the proper price levels are. So there are many of these examples, and it's really difficult to assess what effect is valid in what context. And I think also it's difficult to say how to best work with these effects, right? So even if you know, as I said in the example before, you know about price thresholds, and you said the optimal price from using price elasticities is 17 euros, it's really not clear if you should go for 19.99, for example, or 14.99. So there are other things at play. Should you even at all work with the price threshold, or should you let go of these totally? That these are questions that are important. And they are, because of the anecdotal nature of behavioral pricing in particular, difficult to answer. And what we want to do is start with a simple example that I think most people know, show how the next step in behavioral pricing, and in particular in its application, should look like. So to make it easy, let's start with a simple example that probably most of you know, and it's the example of wine bottles, and the idea of setting a high price anchor to make a wine bottle appear more attractive in its pricing. So, and typically it's been told in this way. So you have two wine bottles, one cheaper one at 10 euros, bottle A, and a more expensive one, bottle B, at 30 euros. And if you make this offer to a larger number of people, let's say you sell 60-40%. So most people will buy the cheaper wine, because most people would think, the 30 euro wine is a bit expensive. Let's go with the cheaper wine. And it works because it's difficult for many people to assess what a good wine is. If you taste the two, most won't be able to tell which is the better one. So the typical idea is then to exploit this situation from a behavioral point of view is to add a decoy wine, a third wine that is more expensive than the previously more expensive wine. So we add a bottle C, at a price of 50 euros. And what happens, and that's so what would you expect if everyone was rational? You would expect that some percentage from here, from the bottle A, would go to C, and some percentage from B would also go to C. So if C gains 5%, you would still think that the majority of customers go for product A and not for B. And this is the oddity that happens here. Because there is a decoy C, now B appears to be priced more reasonable. And some of the customers who previously bought bottle A now buy bottle B. So, and that's something that you wouldn't expect if everyone was rational, because under rationality, and I think based on the axioms proposed by von Neumann Morgenstern, you wouldn't be affected by a third offer. So your preference between A and B shouldn't be affected by whatever happens with C or D and so on and other bottles. And this is really a failure in rationality. But why does this happen? I think for most of us, that's quite understandable, is because it's difficult, as we said, to assess the quality of the wines, and most people are risk averse, and if you show them only A and B, most will go for A because they don't want to overspend. And now that there's bottle C, B appears to be cheaper, and now more people go for the middle option, or that's been created by the decoy, and buy bottle B. So this is the case. This is the case where behavioral pricing, by adding a wine where you expect that very few people will buy it, you make B appear more attractive. So this is the effect here. And let's see how that can look like in a solution. Just give me 1 second. Almost there. All right. Paul, can you see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Perfect. So we've replicated the 3 or at the moment 2 wine bottle in our solution. And just very briefly, I won't go into the details on that. If you're interested, we have tons of webinars and material on how our solution works. But essentially what we have underneath here is that you can create offers, any type of offer, and underneath are what we call virtual shoppers or virtual customers, and they have preferences on, in this case, different wine bottles. And they can also, we will see how that works, they can be rational or they can also be irrational. So they can have behavioral properties so that they, for example, in this case, fall for the decoy effect. So, and what we will do is just demonstrate how the logic here works. So in the base case, we only have 2 wine bottles. We have the good quality and the better quality. We have costs that's not relevant for the moment, and we have the prices as we had on the slide. So the 10 euro and the 30 euro price. And if we show that to a number of these virtual shoppers, so each one of them has, like real people, has a different preference for different wine bottles. So, and if, let's say, we change a price here from the original one, you will see that some of the customers who bought this wine, the good wine before, will now switch to the better wine because we made it more expensive. So, and the more we increase the price, the more we lose here, and some of them will go to this other wine here. And we see that in the case where we have prices of 10 and 30, that we have exactly the market shares that we had before. So 40% will buy the better wine and 60% will buy the good wine as we had before. So, and if we then add this third wine bottle and still keep the virtual customers rational, so none of them is falling for the decoy effect. What happens is that we now have these 3 bottles, and we see that instead of the 60%, we now have 55% buying the good bottle. And we have 37% buying the better and about 7-8% going for the best wine. So this is when everyone is still rational. And what we now do is we add the behavioral effect. So essentially what we do is we take our rational customer, and because it's a computer system, we can turn on and off these effects. And this allows us to understand also how strong that effect is. And you see here that when we do that, we get the shares that where the better price is, better bottle is been bought by 59%, this one here by 36%, and this one here by 5%. Only if we make these virtual shoppers irrational by turning on the middle preference effect, do they buy the shares that we had also shown on the slides. So, and if we look at these 3 things in comparison, we have the 2 bottle case that we looked at with these market shares. We have the 3 bottle case, if everyone is still rational, and then we have the case where we have 3 bottles and we have turned on the behavioral effect, and we see how the shares differ. And of course, with units, the difference isn't that big. But if we look at the revenue or the profit effect, we see that by exploiting this behavioral effect, we can do much better than in a world where everyone is rational. So, and this allows us to do different things here. At first, we understand how strong that behavioral effect is, because without it, we wouldn't know how much comes just from the fact that we added the 3rd bottle, and how much can be attributed to the behavioral effect. So we can separate the purely rational effect of that comes from adding a 3rd bottle from the behavioral effect that comes from the fact that now some customers are being drawn from the better option to the best option. And what we could then do in the next step, looking at the time, we won't do that now. The next step would be, so is it actually correct to price the products in the way that we did, right? So is it best to have prices at, for example, 10, 30, and 50, or would it be better to have, let's say, 15, 35, 50? So different prices. So what you can do with this is you can, once the effects are understood and parameterized correctly in the solution, you can then use them to optimize the different effects and optimize your offer beyond the purely anecdotal effect that you see in that's typically described. So you can actually make it usable and combine it with different features in your tools. So, and it tells you, just to summarize what we had already seen in the solution, this is what you see with pure rational behavior, and this is what you saw if people are allowed to be irrational. And you can, with the solution like that, you can simulate both. You can turn on and off these effects and look at what effect the behavioral property has here. So it increases this by 22 percentage points, it reduces the small one by 19, and it also reduces the large bottle by a certain percentage. So, and just to wrap up, so in the tool, and I hope you got at least a brief understanding of how it works, we can simulate very many of these effects, and we have already included the key effects, for example, for our software customers, what's often important if they sell online are these default nudges, where you say most customers use the better product, for example, or if you have 4 products, they most use like the 3rd or the 2nd of these products, and you can move that and see what effects that has on the choice of customers. You can of course look at what effect something like a price anchor has, where you say, okay, the product was $12.99 before, now it's $9.99. You can look at price thresholds. You can look at all of these effects and see how they affect customer behavior. And you can also to some extent see which ones you want to use, like the power of free, where you give something away for free at a product, how you, as I said already, use these default nudges, or how you use these highlights here. All of these properties can be used, and from what we see, this is actually a very powerful application, because it takes the behavioral topic, behavioral pricing, from mostly anecdotal, where people say, okay, this is an effect, this is something that we serve, this might be interesting or not, but makes it actually actionable for real pricing decisions. And just before we close and go to the Q&A, just one last example that we've come across lately quite a lot is the question of price thresholds. And just let me explain this simple example. So this is anonymized. So it in reality, it wasn't a chocolate snack, but something similar. And from a survey, like a Garpo Granger type survey, we got the following results. If you ask people about their willingness to pay, or if they would buy the product at different price points, you go from here somewhere 40-50 cent to above €1. You see that demand declines to some extent gradually, and then you have, when you go from 90 cent to €1, you have about a 35% decline in demand. So, and this is here the price threshold, and this is looking across context, something that's very common, that if you ask people and just focus them on this one product, would you buy it? And then you go through a price threshold, you always have a large drop in demand. When in reality, we looked at this very product, and each dot here is the sales per week at different price points. You see that there's, or you probably can't see it with your eyes. If you do the math, you see that there's still a price threshold here, but you can already see that it's much weaker than what's suggested by the survey. And this is something that we see quite a lot. And in many companies, we see that they are very hesitant to go through a price threshold when they really shouldn't. And the main reason isn't that something that the virtual shopper technology that we use solves quite well, is the fact that in a survey, you ask people, would you want to buy this product or nothing at all? So the focus is really on this one product, whereas in reality, in most cases, when people stand in front of a shelf and they can choose between many products, the actual question for most is not, do I buy this or nothing at all, but rather, do I buy this or something else? So the effect of the price thresholds, do I buy this or nothing, is covered by the more relevant question, do I buy this or that or this or that? And if you have many other alternatives, the effect of this one behavioral effect declines. And the actual strength of the price threshold in this case is much weaker. And we can also, and we've done this in the past, you can see that if you have fewer products, so for example, if you have something that uses a price threshold at the checkout, where people actually can only choose between maybe this product and no product at all, or just choose between 2 or 3 products, the price threshold is much more relevant than in a case where you have dozens of products to choose from. And that's when you are actually making these pricing decisions. This is super relevant, of course, to understand how a price threshold works in reality, and that it's almost always much different than what's been suggested by a survey that only looks at this one product. And this is what we see, something super relevant for actual decision making, and where a solution like this one can lead to much better results than alternatives. Just to close, see, Paul's already back. Something important, I think this is very obvious, like in medicine, too much of a good thing can also cause harm. behavioral effects is something that works, and it's important to understand them and use them properly, as we showed hopefully in this discussion. But of course, if you use too many of them, and I think in this example, and I think we've all seen them late night on TV, these car wash materials here, they tend to use everything that's available. I'm not sure if we found all of the behavioral effects that they try to exploit here. If you're using too much of it, at some point it doesn't work anymore. So be careful, and it's really important to have the proper dose in what you use. So don't use all of them. I hope this is an important piece of advice before we go to the Q&A.
Great. Right on time for the Q&A. Everyone who needs to drop out, obviously, will send you the recording and also the document afterwards. Someone asked whether this logic would work for similar quality of products, and by this logic they mean the good, better, best portfolio. So what they said, if it's basically 3 products that are all the same, for instance, in an online shop where you have maybe a iPhone in 3 different colors or so. Does the
can you say I missed the first part?
So the question is, how would the good, better, best logic, the preference for the middle, work for a similar quality of product?
So this is not the standard application. I think I would have to understand the specific case, and how we can apply this in the solution. I think there's probably less data on these type of things. So if you have the same product, if I understand correctly, in different colors, we would have to see if this has been parameterized, or if this needs to be parameterized with like, for example, an additional survey to work properly. This is not the typical way these things are done, because if you have, particularly in the case of color, there's no like obvious order in which you would decide which one to put in the middle.
Okay. So if we have like Coke, Fanta, Sprite, then it would be a different story from having a small, medium, and large Sprite. Okay. So the next question is, on online channels, how can this be used given the pricing filters and sorting that can be applied there? I'm not 100% sure what that refers to, I think.
So online, it's really important what the context is, or how the products are shown. So for example, if you show products on your own website where you have full control over the offer, of course you can do whatever you want, and you can choose the one that makes most sense. In other cases, so for example, if you are offering a product at via like some website, like some price comparison tool where you offer, then you need to understand what the logic of that solution is. So we have some experience with that, where you still have things like where you can highlight certain features, you can highlight certain discounts, and so on. And also what we found is really important there is, of course, the ranking. So for example, one thing you can optimize to some extent is if where you are ranked with your offer. Let's say you have, like, your competitor products are priced at the top. The cheapest without you is 10, the next is 15, and the next is 20. And you have some threshold effects if you move past 10, 15, and 20. So if you are ranked first, that has a certain advantage versus ranked second, and you can compute what price you need to have to, or given all the other features, to be ranked first, and then you can see if that makes sense from an economic point of view. So just to summarize, and I hope that wasn't too confusing, is the ranking plays a major role, but it's not the only thing that matters. And you can, for example, with these virtual shoppers, see where you would be ranked in the end, and then decide yourself or via some algorithm, if it makes sense to gain a rank, and what's being understood in the parameterization, what the value of a certain rank is, 1/2, 2/3, and so on.
All right. I think that's actually it in terms of questions. Maybe you can go to the last slide just to show what we have in store in terms of next webinars. Next one will be on September 30th on pricing tools. So what tools to leverage from Excel to AI. And then we're also doing a partner webinar about pricing and RGM strategy in these uncertain times. So looking forward to seeing you all there, and have a great weekend.
Yep, same from my side. Many thanks for attending. Yeah, if you have any questions afterwards, please send them to us. And otherwise, have a great weekend, have a good next week, and then hopefully we'll see you again in our next webinar. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.